My relatives called the ranch a burden, until the lawyer uncovered the clause tied to the creek. The day I turned 18 felt like a door closing more than one opening. It was a Tuesday in March, the sky the color of dishwater, a cold dampness seeping through the window frames of the Northgate Youth Services facility. For 6 years, this had been my reality. 6 years of beige walls, fluorescent lights that hummed with a kind of institutional sorrow, and the constant, low-grade noise of other people's lives bumping up against my own. Freedom, when it came, wasn't a triumphant burst of sunlight. It was a social worker named Carol handing me a thin manila envelope and a duffel bag containing everything I owned in the world. Her smile was professional, stretched thin, the kind you use when you've run out of things to say. "Well, Leo," she'd said, her voice echoing slightly in the tiled entryway, "you're officially an adult. Good luck out there." Good luck. The words hung in the air like smoke. I'd learned long ago that luck was a resource, just like money or food, and some people were born with a deficit. I clutched the envelope. It felt impossibly light, as if it contained nothing more than air and paperwork. My final report card, my birth certificate, a list of resources for transitional youth that I knew were mostly dead ends and waiting lists. That was supposed to be the sum total of my launch into the world. If you've ever felt that your entire life could fit inside a single flimsy folder, then you know the specific kind of hollowness I'm talking about. It's a feeling that makes you wonder if you've been leaving any footprints at all. Stick with me through this, because what was inside that envelope and what it led to wasn't just about my past. It was about a future I never knew I was allowed to have. And if this story resonates with you, maybe hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know to feel like you're not just talking into the void. I took the city bus to a temporary shelter, a place with a 3-night limit and beds that smelled of bleach and desperation. I found a corner in the common room, the envelope resting on my lap like a sleeping cat. I didn't want to open it. Part of me was afraid it would be empty, a final, cruel joke. Another part was afraid of what it might contain. In the system, you learn that paperwork is never good news. It's a placement change, a court date, a denial of services. But eventually, the need to know became greater than the fear of knowing. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside, beneath the expected documents, was another, smaller envelope. It was thick, made of heavy cream-colored paper, and addressed to me in a spidery, unfamiliar hand. There was no stamp, just my name, Leo Vance. The return address was for a law office in a town I'd never heard of. Gable and Sons, attorneys at law, Willow Creek, Montana. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Montana. That's where my grandfather had lived. That's where he had died 2 years ago, while I was stuck here, 150 miles away, counting down the days. My aunt and uncle, his only other living relatives, had handled the arrangements. They'd called my caseworker once, a brief, sterile conversation that Carol had relayed to me. He was gone. There was a small service. The property was a wreck, they'd said, a money pit they'd have to deal with. And that was it. They never called again. They were the ones who signed the papers that put me in Northgate after my mom died, citing an inability to provide adequate care. I always knew that was code for inability to be bothered. I pulled out the letter. The paper was crisp, expensive. It smelled faintly of old books and pipe tobacco. The letter was dated a week prior. It began, "Dear Mr. Vance, on behalf of the late Arthur Vance, I am writing to inform you that upon reaching the age of legal majority, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate. The words blurred. Estate. It sounded so formal, so grand. I knew what it really meant. It meant the ranch. 160 acres of rocks and dust that my grandfather had clung to his entire life. The letter went on. Mr. Gable explained that my grandfather's will was ironclad. He'd left everything to me: the land, the house, the contents. He also explained the complications. 2 years of unpaid property taxes were coming due. The county had issued multiple citations for code violations: a leaking roof, unsafe wiring, a collapsed section of fencing. My aunt and uncle, as temporary administrators of the estate, had petitioned the court to have the property condemned and sold at auction to cover the debts. They had an offer from a developer, Ridgeback Holdings, that would settle the accounts and, in the lawyer's dry phrasing, resolve the matter efficiently. He had managed to delay the proceedings, arguing that the sole heir was a minor and had the right to decide the property's fate upon turning 18. That day was today. I had 30 days, the letter stated, to either assume control of the property and its associated debts or to consent to the sale. A check for the remaining proceeds, which Mr. Gable estimated would be a few $1,000s after all fees were paid, would be mailed to me. A few $1,000s. It felt like a fortune and an insult at the same time. I read the last line over and over. Your grandfather was very specific in his instructions. He wanted you to have the choice. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience to discuss your decision. The choice. It felt like a test. For 2 years, I had nursed a quiet, bitter resentment toward my grandfather. He never came to visit. He never wrote. In my darkest moments, I'd convinced myself he didn't care, that he'd left me to rot in this place, just like my aunt and uncle had. But this letter, this felt different. He had made sure I had the choice. He had trusted a lawyer to protect that choice for 2 long years. The relatives called it a burden, a money pit, a problem to be resolved efficiently. But my grandfather had called it an inheritance. I looked around the noisy, crowded shelter, at the tired faces and the worn-out shoes. I could take the few $1,000s. It would be the smart thing to do. It would give me a fresh start, a security deposit on an apartment, a bit of breathing room. It was the easy way out. But as I sat there, a feeling I hadn't felt in years began to stir in my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something sharper, more stubborn. It was defiance. They all thought I was a lost cause, a piece of paper in a file. They thought I'd take the money and run. They were about to find out they were wrong. The next morning, I used the payphone in the hall to call the number on the letterhead. A calm, steady voice answered. Gable and Sons. My name is Leo Vance, I said, my own voice sounding thin and young. I'm calling about my grandfather's estate. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of a chair creaking. Mr. Vance, the voice said, warmer now. I've been expecting your call. The bus ride to Willow Creek was like traveling backward in time. I left the sprawling gray city behind, watching as the concrete and steel bled into strip malls, then into suburbs, then finally gave way to vast, open country. The bus was old, the seats worn smooth, the windows smudged with the ghosts of 1,000 different journeys. For 16 hours, I watched America roll by. I saw towns with names like Hope and Regret. I saw factories with broken windows and fields of corn that stretched to the horizon. I had my duffel bag on the seat beside me and my grandfather's letter in my jacket pocket, its sharp corners a constant reminder of the reason for this pilgrimage. I was running on 3 nights of shelter food and a growing sense of unreality. Every mile put more distance between me and the life I had known, the structured, predictable world of Northgate. Out here, the rules were different. The silence was bigger. The sky was bigger. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. I thought about my grandfather, Arthur. My memories of him were fractured, like faded photographs from a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. I remembered the smell of his workshop, sawdust and oil and something earthy, like the soil itself. I remembered his hands, calloused and strong, showing me how to skip a stone across the creek that ran through his property. He was a quiet man, his words carefully chosen, but his eyes were always full of a fierce, steady light. After my mom got sick, we saw him less and less. Her illness took all our time, all our energy, all our money. When she was gone, my aunt and uncle swooped in, their faces masks of strained sympathy. They said the ranch was no place for a boy. They said I needed stability, structure. They used a lot of words that sounded good on paper, but felt like lies in my gut. I was 14. I didn't have a voice. I never saw Arthur again. I just got the news 2 years ago that he was gone, and the silence he left behind was filled with the story I told myself, that he had given up on me. Now, I wasn't so sure. This journey felt like a chance to find the real story. The bus finally pulled into Willow Creek just as the sun was setting, painting the jagged peaks of the distant mountains in shades of orange and purple. The town was little more than a single main street, a collection of brick buildings with faded awnings. A diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a small, unassuming office with a polished brass plate that read, Gable and Sons. It felt like a movie set. I stepped off the bus, the air crisp and clean, smelling of pine and cold stone. It was so different from the city's exhaust-choked air. I felt small under the enormous sky. I found the law office easily. The light was still on inside. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy wooden door. A small bell chimed. The man who looked up from the desk was older, with kind eyes and a fringe of white hair. He wore a tweed jacket that looked as comfortable and worn as he did. "You must be Leo," he said, his voice the same calm, steady one I'd heard on the phone. He stood up and offered a hand. "I'm Thomas Gable." His handshake was firm. He didn't treat me like a kid or a case file. He looked at me like a person. "It's a long trip," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Water?" I just shook my head, too nervous to speak. He seemed to understand. He sat back down, folding his hands on his large oak desk. The office was filled with books, floor to ceiling. It felt safe, solid. "Your aunt and uncle have been persistent," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "They believe selling is in your best interest. Ridgeback Holdings has renewed their offer. It's for $75,000. After the taxes and fees, you'd walk away with about $45,000. $45,000. The number was staggering. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding in my life. It was a new life, handed to me on a platter. It was the sensible choice, the easy choice. "What's the catch?" I asked, the words coming out before I could stop them. Mr. Gable smiled faintly. "The catch is that you'd be selling your grandfather's home. The catch is that you'd be giving up the only thing he had to leave you." He leaned forward slightly. "Leo, your grandfather sat in that very chair you're in now, about 6 months before he passed. He knew he was sick. He knew he didn't have much time. He made me promise that I would make sure you got this choice. He said, 'Tom, they'll tell the boy it's a burden. They'll tell him it's worthless. But it's his home. It's his birthright. Make sure he gets to see it for himself before he signs anything away.'" My throat felt tight. He had been thinking of me. He had been planning, protecting me, even when I thought he had forgotten. "I want to see it," I said, my voice hoarse. "I want to go to the ranch." Mr. Gable nodded slowly, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. "I thought you might say that," he said. "I have the keys right here." He gave me a key ring with 2 old, heavy brass keys on it. He also gave me a map, a prepaid cell phone with his number programmed in it, and a thick envelope. "There's a little cash in there," he said, seeing my hesitation. "An advance against the estate. Your grandfather set up a small contingency fund for this exact purpose. For you, to get you started." He drove me to the edge of town, to a beat-up old truck parked near the diner. "Belonged to your grandfather," he said, handing me the keys. "Runs rough, but it runs. The ranch is about 5 miles out. Follow the dirt road at the fork. You can't miss it." I stood there, holding the keys to a truck I barely knew how to drive, with a map to a place I couldn't remember, my mind reeling from the sheer impossibility of it all. "Thank you," I managed to say. He just clapped me on the shoulder. "Go on, son," he said gently. "Go home." The drive out to the ranch was a jarring, rattling affair. The old Ford grumbled and shook, every pothole in the dirt road a percussive jolt through the worn-out suspension. The headlights cut a weak yellow path through the gathering dark, illuminating a tunnel of looming pines and skeletal aspen trees. The farther I drove from the small constellation of lights that was Willow Creek, the deeper the darkness became, until the only things that seemed to exist were the truck, the road, and a breathtaking canopy of stars overhead. More stars than I had ever seen in my life. I felt a knot of fear and anticipation tightening in my stomach. This was it. The place my relatives called a burden. The place my grandfather called home. The map was simple enough. After about 15 minutes of careful driving, I saw it. A rusted metal archway over a cattle guard, the words Vance Ranch, barely legible in peeling paint. I turned the truck onto the even rougher private lane, the branches of overgrown lilac bushes scraping against the doors like desperate fingers. The house appeared suddenly, a dark shape against the star-dusted sky. It was worse than I had imagined. Mr. Gable had been gentle in his description. The word dilapidated didn't quite cover it. The porch roof sagged in the middle like a tired old man slumping his shoulders. Paint peeled from the clabbered siding in long, curling strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. Several windows were boarded up. The whole place seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for one final gust of wind to exhale and collapse into a pile of memories and dust. I parked the truck and got out, the engines ticking the only sound in the profound silence. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I walked up the creaking steps of the porch, my footsteps unnervingly loud. One of the old brass keys Mr. Gable had given me fit the lock. It turned with a stubborn groan, and the heavy wooden door swung inward, opening into a wall of blackness that felt ancient and absolute. It smelled of dust, of mice, of time itself. I fumbled for the prepaid phone, turning on its small flashlight. The beam cut a nervous, trembling circle through the gloom. I was in a living room. Furniture sat shrouded in white cloths, like a congregation of ghosts. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, sparkling in the flashlight's beam like malevolent glitter. To my left was a massive stone fireplace, its hearth cold and black. I swept the light across the room, my heart pounding. This was his house. He had walked these floors, sat in these chairs. It felt like trespassing. I moved slowly, methodically, from room to room. The kitchen was a time capsule from the 1970s, with avocado green appliances and linoleum that had cracked and yellowed. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly his. The bed neatly made, a pair of worn work boots sitting on the floor beside it, as if he'd just taken them off. The other room was smaller. It had a child's bed and a small wooden desk. A faded poster of the solar system was tacked to the wall. My room. I remembered that poster. I remembered lying in that bed, tracing the orbits of the planets with my finger. My grandfather reading to me from a book about stars. The memory was so sudden, so vivid, it felt like a punch to the gut. I had to brace myself against the doorframe, a wave of grief washing over me so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I spent the next hour just exploring, touching things, trying to bridge the gap between the boy who lived here and the young man who stood here now. The place was a wreck, no doubt about it. The roof leaked in the kitchen, a dark stain spreading across the ceiling. The wallpaper was peeling in the hallway, but it was solid. The bones of the house were good, built from thick, honest timber. It wasn't a ruin, it was just neglected, sleeping. In what must have been his study, a small room lined with bookshelves, I found a heavy oak desk. Unlike the rest of the furniture, it wasn't covered. It looked as though he'd been sitting there just yesterday. But the drawers were all locked. A quick search of the desktop and the surrounding shelves yielded nothing. No keys. I tried to force one of the drawers, but it was solid oak, built to last. Frustration began to set in. If there were answers here, they were locked away from me. I thought back to the stories he used to tell me, the way his mind worked. He was a practical man. He didn't do things without a reason. Where would a practical man hide a key? I started a more systematic search. I checked under the desk blotter, tapped the wooden panels for hollow spots, looked inside the dusty books on the shelves. Nothing. Defeated, I sank into the desk chair, the old leather sighing under my weight. I ran my hand along the armrest, my eyes scanning the room. And then I saw it. Hanging on a hook by the door was a threadbare barn coat, the kind he always wore. It was covered in dust, forgotten. It seemed like too obvious a place, but I got up and walked over to it. I plunged my hand into the right-hand pocket. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a small, ornate brass key. It looked like it belonged to a piece of furniture. It looked like it belonged to a desk. My hand was shaking as I went back to the desk and inserted the key into the lock of the main drawer. It fit perfectly. With a satisfying click, the lock disengaged. I pulled the drawer open. It wasn't filled with papers or bills as I had expected. It was almost empty. Sitting right in the center was a single object, a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This had to be it. I sat down and opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was my grandfather's, strong, slanted, purposeful. And the first line, written in dark black ink, was addressed to me. "My dear Leo," it began, If you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you have come home. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man for his silence. I felt a tremor go through me, a deep, shuddering release of tension I hadn't even known I was holding. I wasn't here as a trespasser. I was here because he had wanted me to be. The journal wasn't just a journal. It was a collection of letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, written over the last 2 years of his life. He had never been silent at all. He had been talking to me this whole time. I sat there in the dusty, silent house, the beam of my phone's flashlight my only companion, and I began to read. The first letter was dated just a few weeks after I was taken to Northgate. His anguish was a living thing on the page. "Leo," he wrote, "they came today with the papers, your aunt and uncle. They have a lawyer. They say I'm too old, that the ranch is no place to raise a boy. They say I don't have the money to fight them in court. And God help me, they're right about that. The doctors gave me a diagnosis last month. It's my heart. They say I need to avoid stress. What a joke. Every beat of my failing heart is a stress, knowing you're in that place without me." He explained the impossible situation he'd been in. His health was failing faster than he'd let on, and the ranch was barely breaking even. A legal battle for custody would have bankrupted him, and even if he won, he feared he wouldn't have lived long enough to see me to adulthood, leaving me an orphan all over again. He saw signing me over to the state, with his sister as the nominal next of kin, as the only way to ensure I'd be housed and fed until I was 18. It wasn't abandonment. It was a desperate, heartbreaking sacrifice. I had to stop reading. A raw, ragged sob escaped my throat, the first I'd allowed myself in years. The story I had constructed to protect myself, the narrative of the grandfather who didn't care, shattered into a million pieces. He had cared. He had cared so much it broke his own heart. I cried for the boy who had felt so alone. I cried for the old man who had died alone, writing letters to a grandson who would never receive them in time. I cried for the years we had lost, the silence that had been filled with nothing but pain and misunderstanding. It was a storm of grief, and when it finally passed, it left a strange, quiet calm in its wake. The bitterness was gone, washed away. In its place was a profound, aching love. I picked up the journal again. His words were a lifeline, a connection to him across the final divide. He wrote about his days on the ranch, the small victories and frustrations. He told me stories about my mother when she was a little girl, growing up in this very house. He wrote about the land, not as a collection of acres, but as a living entity, with its own moods and secrets. And then, in a letter dated about a year before he died, the tone shifted. It became more urgent, more secretive. "Leo, there's something you need to know about this place," he wrote. "Something nobody else knows, not even Tom Gable. Your relatives see this land as 160 acres of dirt. They see the creek as a nuisance that floods in the spring. They don't see what's really here. I haven't been just a rancher all these years. I've been a student of the earth." He went on to describe his lifelong, self-taught passion for geology. He'd spent decades walking the property, studying the rock formations, reading every book he could find. He believed there was something special about the land, something hidden. "It's not in any deed or document," he wrote. "It's in the land itself. I have my proof, but it's not something I could ever trust to a bank or a safe. People get greedy. Corporations get greedy. They would have taken it, Leo. They would have torn this place apart and left you with nothing. So I hid it all. When you're ready, you need to find my map. It's not a map of the property, but a map of the heart. Look for it where the world is measured." The letter ended there. A new mystery laid at my feet. A map of the heart, where the world is measured. What did that even mean? I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was more than just an inheritance of land and debt. This was a quest, a puzzle left for me by the one person who had never truly given up on me. He hadn't just left me a choice, he had left me a purpose. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold on the dusty couch, the journal resting on my chest. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the air. The house didn't seem so menacing in the daylight. It just looked sad, waiting. I made a pot of coffee on the old percolator in the kitchen, the process a small, comforting ritual. As I drank the bitter black liquid, my mind raced, turning over my grandfather's words. A map of the heart, where the world is measured. It sounded like a line from a poem. I wandered into his study, the room where I'd found the journal. My eyes scanned the bookshelves. They were filled with texts on animal husbandry, crop rotation, engine repair, and a whole section on geology. Thick, academic-looking books with titles like Stratigraphy of the Northern Rockies and A Field Guide to Igneous Rocks. It had to be here. This was his world. He measured it, studied it, understood it. I started pulling books off the shelf, one by one, shaking them, flipping through the pages. Nothing. I went through dozens of them, my hope starting to wane. It was a fool's errand. The phrase was probably just a metaphor, an old man's poetic turn of phrase. I was about to give up when my hand rested on a particularly thick, heavy volume at the end of the shelf. It was an old atlas, its cover cracked and faded. An atlas, a book literally filled with measurements of the world. My heart started to beat faster. I pulled it from the shelf and laid it on the desk. I opened it carefully, the old binding creaking in protest. The first few pages were maps of the world, of the country, of the state. But tucked into the crease of the page for Montana was a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed and soft, creased from years of being hidden. I unfolded it. It wasn't a professionally drawn map. It was sketched by hand, in my grandfather's familiar, steady script. It was a detailed map of the ranch. Every fence line was marked, every rise and fall of the land. The house was a small, neat square, and snaking through the property was a dark blue line, labeled Willow Creek. He had paid special attention to the creek. The drawing of it was thicker, more detailed, and at a sharp bend in the creek, on the far western edge of the property, he had drawn a small X. Next to it, he had written a short, cryptic phrase, "Where the stones speak." This was it. This was the map of the heart. It wasn't just a guide to a location, it was a guide to his passion, to the secret he had dedicated his life to uncovering. I had to go there. I had to see what he wanted me to find. Just as I was folding the map to put it in my pocket, the prepaid phone Mr. Gable had given me buzzed. The screen showed an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Leo?" The voice was sharp, impatient. It was my Aunt Carol. "We heard you were in town. What do you think you're doing?" I was silent for a moment, shocked by the directness of the attack. "I'm looking at my property," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's not your property yet," she snapped. "It's a toxic asset. You have no idea what you're getting into. The taxes alone will drown you. We have a buyer, a respectable company, willing to take this mess off our hands and give you a fresh start. Don't be a fool, Leo. Sign the papers. take the money." Her words were like stones, hard and cold. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what I wanted. She just told me what to do, just like she had 6 years ago. "It was my grandfather's home," I said quietly. She scoffed. "Your grandfather was a sentimental old man who let this place fall to ruin. He did you no favors by saddling you with it. The offer from Ridgeback is more than fair. It's generous. It expires in 2 weeks. Sign the papers, or you'll end up with nothing but a bill from the county when they bulldoze the place." The line went dead. I stood there, the phone in my hand, my aunt's venom ringing in my ears. She was trying to scare me. Her and my uncle and this Ridgeback company. They wanted me gone, and the more they pushed, the more certain I became that they were hiding something. They didn't see a burden, they saw an opportunity, and they were terrified I was about to figure out what it was. I grabbed my jacket and the map and headed for the door. It was time to find out why they were so afraid of a broken-down ranch and a little creek. The walk to the far side of the property took the better part of an hour. There was no clear path, just a game trail that wound its way through dense thickets of willow and aspen. The land was rougher here, sloping down toward the creek bed. The air grew cooler, filled with the sound of rushing water. It was a wild, untamed place, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me as I walked. This was his land, my land. Finally, I broke through the trees and found myself on the bank of Willow Creek. It was wider and faster than I remembered, the water running clear and cold over a bed of smooth, multicolored stones. I checked the hand-drawn map. I followed the curve of the bank until I found it. A sharp, almost 90-degree bend where a massive gray boulder sat half-submerged in the water. This was the X on the map. This was the place where the stones speak. I looked around. It was just a creek, a pile of rocks. There was nothing here, no hidden cave, no secret entrance. Disappointment washed over me. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was it all just the rambling of a sick old man? I sat down on the grassy bank, feeling defeated. The sun was warm on my face, the sound of the creek a steady, hypnotic murmur. I picked up a flat, smooth stone and skipped it across the water, just like he had taught me. 1, 2, 3, 4 skips before it sank. I remembered the feel of his hand on my back, the quiet encouragement in his voice. "Listen to the stones, Leo," he used to say. "They have stories to tell." I looked at the rocks lining the creek bed. They were a jumble of granite, quartz, and sandstone, washed smooth by centuries of flowing water. What story could they possibly tell? Then I noticed something odd. Right at the base of the big boulder, near the water line, there was a patch of smaller stones that didn't quite match the rest. They were darker, almost black, and they seemed to be arranged in a deliberate pattern, a rough circle. It was subtle. You would never notice it unless you were looking for it, really looking. Where the stones speak. It wasn't a metaphor. It was an instruction. They were speaking to me, telling me where to dig. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I scrambled down the bank and began to pull the dark stones away. They were heavy, wedged deep into the wet soil. Beneath them was a layer of packed clay. I dug with my bare hands, the cold mud squishing between my fingers. I dug frantically, driven by a certainty that I couldn't explain. After about a foot, my fingers hit something hard and flat. It wasn't a rock. It was metal. My breath hitched. I dug faster, clearing the mud and soil away until I had uncovered the top of a large black box. It looked like a military footlocker made of heavy-gauge steel with sturdy latches on the front. It was heavy, sealed tight against the elements. It took all my strength to haul it out of the hole and drag it up onto the grassy bank. It was locked with a simple padlock. Of course it was. For a moment, I despaired, but then I remembered the keys Mr. Gable had given me. There were 2 keys on the ring, one for the house and another, smaller, simpler key that I hadn't used. My hand trembled as I fished the key ring from my pocket. I selected the second key. It slid into the padlock. I turned it. With a loud metallic click, the lock sprang open. I took a deep, shuddering breath. This was the heart of it all, the secret he had died to protect. I lifted the heavy lid. The inside was lined with oilcloth to keep it waterproof. And nestled inside, perfectly preserved, were 3 things. The first was another bundle of letters, tied with twine. The second was a collection of small canvas bags, each one tagged and numbered. And the third was a thick file of official-looking documents. I reached for the letters first. There was a single envelope on top, with my name on it. I opened it. "Leo," the letter began, "if you've found this, then you've proven you have more of my stubbornness in you than I thought. And you're going to need it. What I'm about to tell you will change your life, and it will put you in the crosshairs of some very powerful people. Your aunt and uncle are small fish, Leo. They're just greedy and weak. The company they're in bed with, Ridgeback Holdings, is another matter entirely. They're sharks." My blood ran cold. He knew about them. He knew everything. "For 15 years, he wrote, I have been conducting my own geological survey of this land. What I found is something the official state surveys missed. The creek, this very creek, runs directly over one of the richest, most concentrated veins of lithium-bearing spodumene on the continent. The stones in those bags are my core samples. The documents in that file are the independent assay reports from a lab in Denver that confirm it. This land isn't worth $75,000, son. It's worth hundreds of millions." I stared at the words, unable to process them. Millions. It was an abstract concept, a number with no meaning. I opened one of the small canvas bags. Inside were dull, grayish-white rocks laced with pale pink crystals. They looked like nothing special, but they were the key. The letter continued. "Ridgeback knows. I don't know how, but they do. Maybe they have a geologist on staff who's smarter than the rest. They've been trying to get this land for years, making lowball offers, trying to pressure me into selling. When I got sick, they saw their chance. They started working on your aunt and uncle, preying on their greed. Their plan is simple. Get the land for a fraction of its worth from an orphan kid who doesn't know any better, and then sell the mineral rights to the highest bidder. They think you're just a problem to be managed. They think you're weak. You have to prove them wrong." The final paragraph was a plea. "I secured the mineral rights separately from the surface rights decades ago. It's an old legal quirk of the original homestead patent. Those rights are yours, and yours alone. They are detailed in the file. Don't let them steal your birthright, Leo. But this isn't just about the money. This land is our history. It's your home. Whatever you do, make the choice that lets you sleep at night. Make the choice that honors the man you are, not the money you might have. I love you, Grandpa." I sat there on the creek bank for a long time, the letter in my hand, the open box at my feet. The world had tilted on its axis. The quiet ranch, the family dispute, the small-town lawyer. It was all a facade. I was sitting in the middle of a corporate conspiracy, a high-stakes game I had no idea how to play. The weight of it all was crushing. The fear was real, a cold, metallic taste in the back of my throat. But underneath the fear was something else, a slow-burning anger. They had lied. They had all lied. My aunt and uncle weren't just callous, they were thieves. Ridgeback Holdings wasn't just a developer, they were predators. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated my grandfather. They thought this story was over, but it was just beginning. I took out the prepaid phone and dialed the only number I knew I could trust. When Mr. Gable answered, my voice was low and steady. "Mr. Gable," I said, "it's Leo. We need to talk. I'm at the creek, and I think I've just found out why everyone wants this burden so badly." There was a pause. "Don't move," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, stripped of its folksy calm. "Don't talk to anyone else. I'm on my way." Mr. Gable's old sedan bounced down the ranch lane less than an hour later, kicking up a plume of dust. He got out of the car with an urgency I hadn't seen in him before, his tweed jacket looking out of place in the wildness of the landscape. I led him down to the creek, to the open box. He knelt, his knees cracking, and looked inside. He picked up one of the assay reports, his eyes scanning the columns of figures and technical jargon. He was silent for a long time, so long that the only sound was the rush of the water and the rustle of the wind in the aspens. He read my grandfather's final letter. He hefted one of the bags of core samples in his hand. Finally, he looked up at me, his face grim, but his eyes holding a new light of respect. "Your grandfather," he said, his voice full of awe, "was one of a kind, a rancher and a renegade geologist. He played the long game, and he won." He stood up, brushing the dirt from his trousers. "This changes everything, Leo," he said, his lawyerly pragmatism kicking in. "The offer from Ridgeback isn't just an offer, it's attempted fraud. Your aunt and uncle's petition to the court is based on the premise that the estate is insolvent. This," he gestured to the box, "proves the estate is one of the most valuable private landholdings in the state. They have no legal ground to stand on." He explained the implications. The lithium deposit was strategically important. With the rise of electric vehicles and battery technology, demand was skyrocketing. We weren't just talking about wealth. We were talking about power. "Ridgeback won't give up easily," he warned. "When they find out you know, they'll come at you with everything they've got. They'll offer you more money than you can imagine. They'll try to bury you in legal fees. They'll try to prove you're an incompetent young man who can't manage his own affairs. We have to be smart. We have to be ready." We packed up the box and carried it back to his car. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just a box of rocks and papers. It was my future. It was my grandfather's legacy. As we drove back to town, a profound choice began to crystallize in my mind. The easy path was clear. I could let Mr. Gable leak the assay reports, start a bidding war, and sell the mineral rights to the highest bidder. I would be set for life. I could walk away from the dusty ranch, from the painful memories, from the town of Willow Creek. I could buy a condo in the city, a fancy car, and never look back. It was the dream, right? The ultimate escape from the life I'd been handed. But as we drove, I looked out at the rolling hills, the vast sky, the rugged beauty of the land. I thought of my grandfather's words. This isn't just about the money. This land is our history. It's your home. He hadn't gone to all this trouble just to make me rich. He had done it to give me a place to belong. He had done it to give me roots. Selling it felt like a betrayal. It felt like proving my aunt and uncle right, that I was just a kid who would take the money and run. When we got back to his office, I looked at Mr. Gable. "I'm not selling to Ridgeback," I said. "I'm not selling to anyone, not yet." He raised an eyebrow. "What are you proposing?" "I'm staying," I said, the words feeling more right than anything I'd ever said. "I'm going to fix up the house. I'm going to learn about this land. My grandfather didn't want me to cash out. He wanted me to be a steward of this place. If we are going to develop this, we're going to do it the right way. We'll find a partner who respects the land, who will do it sustainably. We'll set up a trust, maybe a foundation in his name. We're not going to let them strip mine his memory." Mr. Gable stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Your grandfather would be so damn proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Mr. Gable filed an injunction against my aunt and uncle, presenting the new evidence to the probate court. The judge threw out their petition immediately and launched an investigation into their administration of the estate and their dealings with Ridgeback Holdings. The phone calls stopped. The threats stopped. There was just a deafening silence from their side of the family. I moved into the ranch for good. I used the contingency fund my grandfather had left to buy supplies at the local hardware store. The owner, a grizzled man named Hank, looked me up and down on my first visit. "You're Arthur's boy," he said. It wasn't a question. "Heard you were back. Good. That place needs a Vance in it." He helped me pick out the right materials to patch the roof, gave me a discount, and told me to come back if I needed any advice. I started small. I cleaned. I scrubbed away years of dust and neglect, letting the light and air back into the house. I patched the leaky roof. I replaced the broken window panes. Every day was hard, physical work. My muscles ached. My hands were covered in cuts and calluses. But with every nail I hammered, with every board I replaced, I felt like I was not just rebuilding a house, but rebuilding myself. I was putting the pieces of my own life back together. I found a rhythm. I'd work on the house in the morning, and in the afternoons I would walk the land with my grandfather's journal and his hand-drawn map. I learned the names of the trees, the patterns of the wind, the places where the deer came to drink at dusk. I was becoming a student of the land, just as he had been. The ranch was no longer a burden. It was a classroom. It was a sanctuary. It was home. One evening, sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, I realized the true nature of my inheritance. It wasn't the lithium in the ground. It wasn't the millions of dollars. It was the choice my grandfather had given me. The choice to turn my back on the easy money and embrace the harder, more meaningful path. The choice to build something instead of cashing out. The choice to honor the past by investing in the future. This story, my story, it isn't really about finding a hidden treasure. It's about uncovering a hidden truth. The truth that the things people call burdens are sometimes the greatest gifts in disguise. They're the things that test us, that force us to decide who we really are. My inheritance wasn't a windfall, it was a responsibility. And accepting it was the first truly adult decision I ever made. It was the moment I stopped being a ward of the state and started being the master of my own life. What I'm building here isn't just a home. It's a testament to a grandfather's love, a love that was quiet but deep, patient enough to wait for me, and smart enough to trust that I would make the right choice when the time came. The fight with Ridgeback is far from over, I know that. There will be lawyers and boardrooms and battles ahead. But I'm not afraid. Because when I stand on this land, I'm not standing alone. I'm standing with him. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening. So many of us are given stories about ourselves by other people. We're told we're a burden, a problem, a lost cause. We're told our inheritance is worthless. But maybe the real inheritance is the chance to write our own story, to find the map of our own heart and follow it, no matter how rough the trail is. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to fight for your own inheritance, whether it's land, a memory, or just a sense of your own worth, let me know in the comments below. I promise you, I read every single one. Your stories matter. This community is built for people who understand that the richest treasures are rarely made of gold. Subscribe to be a part of it. We all deserve a place to call home.